Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Gwen's Bookish Ramblings. So, next book in the Lyra series, Caught in Crystal. Once again, I don't have an older book, so we're just going to have to deal with this cover. The interesting thing about this cover is that it's a crystal, but it's not actually the crystal at issue. It's not in any way really looking like it. So, this is, again, an interesting book that is, it's, again, just a little bit centerpiece adjacent. Like, in this particular one, it's, it's not the fate of everything hanging in the balance right then. It's sort of, in this particular story, it's if you let this go, the fate of everyone will hang in the balance, but you can still stop it. And you can stop it here early on before it becomes any trouble. And it means that this isn't the stuff of grand heroics. This is one of those things that's, well, it's a little bit like all of those fan fictions where people say, well, what if somebody went back in time and made Voldemort, Tom Riddle decide not to become Voldemort? Well, at that point, you haven't done anything grand and heroic. You haven't had any grand adventures. You've just made sure that he grew up with a conscience or, dealt with the fact that he's a budding sociopath, psychopath, and just dealt with it one way or another, but it's not the grand adventure. So, Caught in Crystal, this book is a book that's told partly in flashbacks because it's the story about a woman who winds up having to go back to adventuring decades after she left it all behind. See, this particular story, she was part of a sort of a semi-religious order that was kind of comprised like a heroin making factory, that is heroin with an E, that when she was a very young child, she was orphaned and these sisters pick her up, and basically when you get raised in them, you can choose to become part of the order when you grow up, and the order then sends out so-called stars, that is 4 people. And those 4 people are very much like a D&D group. In point of fact, the Lyra universe is based off of Patricia Reedy's old D&D game that Lyra was actually apparently the D&D game that she was doing back in the day. Anyway, so a star is what? It is a healer, a warrior, a sorcerer, and a quote-unquote demon friend, which is a second kind of sorcerer, really. But what it means is that it's a D&D group. And so in this semi-religious order, Kayl, who is our protagonist, she grew up in this group and she wanted to become one of the warrior types, so that's what she becomes. And then she becomes part of one of these stars, and there are, 4 of them, and they form their little band and so on and so forth. And then they all went on one mission with a couple of Vernon wizards, and apparently Vernons are known for having slaves and enslaving demons. Or Sklethansri, as the book is very, very determined to remind us. And the thing is, they go on this thing with these Vernon wizards, and there's a long history between the Sisterhood and the Vernons, and, enmity and so on and so forth. When they finish going through it, they find this twisted tower and something happens. And she and the others are never quite sure what happened, just that they didn't quite make it in and something horrific happened and several of them died and one of them wound up having these uncontrollable visions. And they're not proper seer's visions because, you know, in this universe, at least in the Lyra universe, when a seer has a vision, that's a thing that is going to happen. That there's, you know, a definite yes or no that this is going to happen. In his case, he sees possibilities. Stuff that happened in the past, stuff that might happen, stuff that's likely to happen, stuff that is very probably going to happen. And so, you know, but when he has these visions, it's, you know, a terrible experience and exhausting and painful and a whole bunch of other stuff. Kayl winds up going off with the man that she fell in love with, one of the two Varnan wizards, and they basically leave their lives behind, and because the whole experience was horrific, and she loses her temper at the Sisterhood because the Sisterhood basically says, you know, all this bad stuff that happened, we're going to blame the Varnans. And she said to them, but it wasn't their fault. They didn't do anything. Yeah, but they're Varnans, so it's fine. Well, at that point, you know, she was acting in defense of the Varnans who had become her friends in the meantime. And they sort of storm off anyways, and she winds up setting up in a small town in the middle of nowhere and becoming an innkeeper along with her husband, who, when the book starts, this book starts like 15 years later. It starts after she's had 2 children, after her husband has died, after she has been alone and running an inn for a very long time. And it opens, basically, it gives us this cold open with all of that background that I just gave you, something that gets told to us in a combination of flashbacks and her telling her story to, you know, people who don't know it. But mostly in flashbacks because, you know, a good author grimly avoids ever doing the, well, as you know, Bob, because if Bob already knows this, why are we telling it to him? So what happens in this is that the crystal, it turns out that what she remembered, what her friend remembers, what actually happened is not what she remembers happening. And that what happened was the friend of theirs who had wound up with the visions had managed to use this ginormous square crystal they had found in the tower to effectively reverse time. You see, there was this giant square crystal, and a scroll gets found in the course of this book that explains that this is a crystal that could be used to see the future, to tell the future, to affect events in some way, and he had managed to use it to effectively rewind the last couple minutes so that they didn't all die. So that this horrific black monster beast thing with tentacles and smoke and, you know, it's very much described as sort of a nondescript, you know, one of those nondescript bundles of just like evil smoke tentacle stuff. You know, the essence of evil is smoke and tentacles, and I mean everybody knows this. That's why, you know, all evil things are nothing but smoke and tentacles, right? I mean, just take Maleficent. So it turns out that the reason why he had this problem was because he had used the crystal, but also because they had been dopey enough to smash a potentially magical crystal. Like, they knocked a corner off of this perfect cube, and that was when all hell broke loose, which, I mean, it's like, why would you do that, you idiot? It's very much, like, what happened 15 years before is very much a, why would you do that, you idiot moment. But anyway, so this book is basically fixing what happened there. And The thing about this book, though, is this book is, once again, it feels just a little bit like it's adjacent to the actual battle. You are not, Aragorn going to face off everyone at, Helm's Deep, or defending wherever he was defending. I never got around to reading those books. I have Lord of the Rings issues, which I'm not going to go into because they're weird personal issues that have nothing to do with the content of the books. They're really weird. Don't think it's any sort of thing about the books. It's just me being weird. Anyways, so there's that, and you're not Frodo going to Mount Doom. What you are is some guy who's being besieged by orcs in a small castle out in the middle of nowhere. It's important to you, and you may even be holding a line that can't afford to break, but you're not actually at the epicenter of events. And in this case, this is finding a small outpost of shadow. And the thing is that you have the shadow, whatever they're called, I don't remember, because memory notes, also because I'm bad with names. That you don't have this battle with all of the power of shadow. You don't have the prevention of an invading army. What you have is, we found this small point, and we kind of have to plug this one hole, or if we don't, then everything will spill over. But it's not actually epic. It probably feels epic to everyone involved, but this book, it doesn't. Like so many of the others in this series, it's just that little bit left of center of epic. And it's such an odd thing. It really, really is. Anyway, at the end of this book, also, we don't really have a resolution to one of the biggest things that are going on, which is that Kayl, when she was much younger, she was part of the Sisterhood, and she could see her future stretching ahead of her, that she was going to be part of the Sisterhood and adventure until she got too old to adventure, and then she would settle down and become a teacher with the Sisterhood, because that's what you do, and that's how these things work, and that was fine. And then the Sisterhood betrayed her, in effect, by, saying, well, we're going to blame this on a bunch of innocent people. And she's like, oh, well, I can't just let you do that. And so she and the man who became her husband, ran off together. And then they settle in and they start up an inn, and she winds up in this position where she's just like, okay, I'm going to be an innkeeper for the rest of forever. And then all of this happens, and she suddenly finds herself saying, I can't be an innkeeper anymore. I can't make myself do it. I can't be that person who sits in one place and does nothing but serve drinks and clean up after them and, count how much coin I got at the end of the day. But she can't go back to the Sisterhood either. She's outgrown them. She's moved past them. She's not one of them anymore. And she has this whole agonizing moment coming up on the end of the book where she says, I have to figure out what I'm going to do. I have to stop being reactive, and I have to act in some way. And then after all of that, she says, but I'm going to figure that out after we do this thing with the tower, because if the tower kills us, then all of my grand thoughts won't matter. And so where does the book end? She's going to go off with this old friend who she has now fallen in love with, and they're going to do stuff. It's the strangest thing, because where it leaves off, it is just like, I don't know what I'm going to do, but we're just going to go off and do things. And on the one hand, it's a very just do it sort of thing, but on the other hand, seriously, that's not a plan. Anyway, that's everything, and I haven't told you anything useful about this book, but tough luck. I'll see you all next week when I talk about the last book in the series.